Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Tonight is Sunday night. It is October 14th, 2018, and tonight's another Smaulgld Sunday night speculation episode, and we're going to look at what impact will the midterm elections have on the gold and silver prices. We're going to get your thoughts on this. I'm going to give you some of my preliminary thoughts, but first let's take a look excuse me, where the gold and silver prices are at the moment. Gold is at $12.1930, up $1.80, and silver's up 14 to 14.61, up about 4 cents. Excuse me. The dollar index is at 95.34, essentially flat. And the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin holding steady at about 61.80. Bitcoin Cash down about 3% at 429. Ethereum down about 2.5% at 191. Litecoin at 51.35, down 3.2%. And Ethereum Classic down to 925, down about 2%. Now tonight, I want to figure out or start to take preliminary ideas and give you some of my preliminary thoughts on how the price of gold and silver might be impacted once the midterm elections are settled and in the run-up to those midterm elections. I would say right now that whatever happened in the stock market, whatever happened in the gold and silver market, have not priced in or even considered whether the midterms will lead to either a total Republican retention of the House and Senate, a split House and Senate, or a Democratic takeover of both houses. Now remember, when Trump ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016, the market had decided that if Donald Trump won, that would be a disaster for the markets. And then, of course, gold and silver would do well. And we saw in 2016, in the summer, how the markets viewed political uncertainty. So when the British voted for Brexit, which was unexpected, the Remains were expected to win by a few percentage points. Once it became clear that Brexit was going to win, the stock markets fell and gold and silver headed higher. And that stayed the case through most of the summer after the Brexit vote. Then they kind of lost momentum and trailed off as all eyes focused on the November battle between Clinton and Trump. When Trump won, or when it appeared that he was going to win, the futures began to sell off, and gold and silver began to rise. When it became clear that he was going to win and that he had announced that he had won and Clinton had conceded, stocks started to fall. The next morning, prices went down 1,000. Everything was in free fall, and gold and silver were headed higher. Now that changed. That started to change within 12 hours. The gold prices started to lose their gains, and the stock market started to turn around, erase its losses, and essentially has headed higher ever since. And the idea at the time in 2016 was, oh, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe Trump, after all, will be good for the economy because he's promised infrastructure, he's promised tax cuts, and that's good for the market. And even though there's uncertainty about him, doesn't matter. We want higher stock prices. So the conventional wisdom going into the election was Trump was bad for the economy, Trump was bad for the stock market, and Clinton would have been a continuation of the same, which the economy had been okay for years, and the stock market had been rising slowly, so they figured that was the best course of action. And when Trump won, people like Paul Krugman immediately the next day said that the markets would never recover, that this was the biggest disaster to ever hit the stock market. Well, as we know from the last 2 years, the markets have decided first of all, one of the reasons that they liked Trump, or they claimed that the stock market went higher, was the infrastructure. There really hasn't been any infrastructure spending. The wall hasn't been built, but we did get the tax cuts. Political uncertainty, I think, was stronger earlier on in 2017 when they appointed a special counsel and there was a lot of talk about impeaching Trump. There still is, but I think that that threat has faded and Trump's approval ratings have also increased. Now remember, when you impeach, it's very difficult to actually convict a president, a sitting president, and remove him. We saw that back in the Clinton days. The Congress put together the impeachment articles, but in order to convict, you need 2/3 of the Senate. I mean, 67 senators have to vote to do that, and unless the parties have that type of majority, or the president has done something so egregious as to harm the nation, then it's very difficult to... Now, they think Nixon could have been impeached in 1974, and that's why he resigned. But we're not sure about that. But going through an embattled impeachment process is very, very bad for the country, and that's why he did resign. Okay, so we know that the market conventional wisdom, or supposedly, was that if Trump got elected, the market would go down. And we saw that that turned out not to be the case, and the market adopted and endorsed the Trump presidency as a reason to push stocks higher, and then also to push gold and silver lower. Now, gold has had its periods of ups and downs since 2016, but the last 6-7 months it's been decidedly down. And one could argue that's because the stock market has gone pretty much straight higher. So what would happen, and I don't think that the markets have a view on this yet. I don't think that the price is going down on Wednesday and Thursday in the stock market, and then Thursday and Friday's gold moves had anything to do with anticipation of the midterm election. So what I want to do is go through the different scenarios and get your views on it. Not who you want to win, not the reasons why you want them to win or lose, but what you would think would happen if the Democrats won both the House and the Senate. If the Democrats won either the House or the Senate only, or if the Republicans won both the House and the Senate and retained majorities or extended the majorities, what would happen to the stock market, or what would people think would happen to the stock market, and consequently, or conversely, what would happen to the prices of gold and silver? So I'll give you my views, and we'll go around and read the comments and see what you guys think. Is, first of all, I think there's a equal chance of any of the three scenarios happening. I can easily see how the Republicans can retain the House and the Senate. I can see a scenario pretty easily where the Democrats win the House but don't win back the Senate. I don't see a scenario where it's very hard, I think, for the Democrats to take back the Senate. And I'm going to explain it in a second. And I also see it's very possible that there's a split. But I think it's difficult for the Democrats to win both the House and the Senate. And the reason I think that is right now, in order for the Democrats to take back the Senate, they are defending in states where they have senators in Montana, Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, and West Virginia. That's 5 states. And I think in those states, those are areas where Trump won by wide margins in 2016. And I don't think he's lost much of his popularity in those states. So, for example, Montana, Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, West Virginia. I think it's going to be difficult for the Democrats to retain all of those seats. And I would guess of the 6 or the 5, they could easily lose 2 of them. That makes it much more difficult for them to retake the Senate, because now they're down to 47. That means they've got to capture 4 in play elsewhere. And that would mean they'd have to take Tennessee, Arizona, Florida, Nevada. And at best, I think they have a shot at only getting 2 of those. I think Tennessee is now out of reach. So that would mean they'd have to sweep Nevada, Arizona, and Florida if they lost the other 2, which would mean they'd be at 50-50, which essentially would mean they wouldn't have control because Pence would be the tiebreaker. And then, of course, you can probably count if West Virginia stays Democratic with Joe Manchin, he's most likely a swing vote anyway, as we saw on the Supreme Court vote, a Republican vote rather than a solid Democrat vote. So I don't really think that the Democrats can win back the Senate, although I think they have a shot at winning back the Congress, but I think the polls are overstating the strength of both with the blue wave. But I want to get into now what would happen if the Republicans retain the Senate and the House. So there's a few things to look at. What would happen to the Mueller investigation and what impact would that have? What would it have? What impact would it have on what's going on with Rod Rosenstein, and that ties into the Mueller investigation? What impact it would have on the appointment of judges, future tax cuts, the future of Obamacare, inflation, potential rate hikes, and then the potential for political uncertainty, unrest, violence, and then also Trump's popularity. So I would think if the GOP won both houses, retained both of them, at least where they are, maybe even gained a seat, I think you'd see the Mueller investigation end pretty quickly. I think then you would see the Republicans turn around and be much more aggressive, so would Trump, in turning the tables on the Russian investigation, getting involved with declassifying documents, the FISA warrants, and essentially turning from defense to offense and going after all the actors like Strzok, Page, Comey, and even up to Clinton and to Obama if they won. I think you'd see a very, very aggressive Republican Party and also Donald Trump, because what he'd want to do is put that whole thing behind him and then move forward with the tax cuts, repealing Obamacare, appointing judges. Now, I think if the Republicans were to win like that and to essentially win big, then you'd have increased violence. I think you would have I think that the markets would view a GOP sweep as very positive, but also for the stock markets, it may also be viewed inflationary, and you might see gold and silver rise, you might see the stock market rise, but then you'd have the wild card, how would the Fed react? And I think the Fed might react with a little more aggressive rate hikes, and that might change the whole tenor of things, where you might see this initial euphoria with the stock market going higher, the gold and silver prices going higher on the announcement of a Republican sweep, but then that might quickly turn the other way because people would start thinking, well, what would that mean for the Fed? So that's one thing that could happen if the GOP wins everything. That also, you'd have to think, what would it mean for 2020? It could mean very good things for 2020 for Donald Trump, or it could mean he peaks early and then the country tires of of his presidency or winning or whatever you call it by 2020, and they're more complacent and maybe they want to change the public wants to change horses in 2020. Now, what if the Democrats win the House but not the Senate, which is possible? I think, well, then you're going to see they're going to spend their time trying to impeach Trump. They're going to be going after his tax returns. They're going to try impeach Kavanaugh. And I think they won't be able to do much, and I think that'll actually help Trump win in 2020. Why? Because impeaching Trump is not going to happen unless there's something in the Mueller investigation. Going after his tax returns, they're not going to be able to stop the judges from being appointed if they don't have the Senate. So they could spend another 2 years resisting, even if they have the House, and voting against tax cuts, preserving Obamacare, but they won't be able to get any legislation through, because even if they manage to get some legislation through because they have a majority, Trump will veto it and they'll never be able to override it. And it probably would only be a House bill because the Senate wouldn't approve it if they didn't control the Senate. So for the Democrats, if they win the House, it just means a lot of noise. And it actually hurts them in 2020. because it would mean that from 2016 all the way to 2020, they basically would have spent their time just complaining about Trump and trying to take him down without actually having a candidate or a message that they can bring and put into that candidate in 2020. Because the last 2 years have basically been the Democrats are about being against Trump, resisting. That's the key term, and that allows Trump to call them a mob. And actually, he'd probably be better off if the Democrats won the House, because if they lose both the House and the Senate, he's going to have free reign, and all he can do is mess up with that free reign. If the Democrats win the House, he can continue to mock them, harass them, call them mobocrats, and so on, and with little worry about them actually causing him any trouble, because they won't be able to impeach him, they won't be able to do much, and he can run against whatever he wasn't able to get done because he didn't have a House majority in 2020 that he can pick up coattails and win there. So I think in that scenario is probably also the best scenario probably for the stock market. Is the stock market likes to see a divided government, and in that case, if the stock market does well and it doesn't look like it can get overheated because Trump will be able to get his tax cuts through because the Democrats will stop them, the stock market would probably grind higher, and that probably wouldn't be good for gold and silver if there was some type of split. Now, if the Democrats manage to pick off both the House and the Senate, that's probably the best scenario for gold and silver, and the worst for the stock market, because it would mean that there would be no momentum for building the wall, infrastructure, for tax cuts, and Obamacare would be kept in place, and it would be seen as a slowing down of, for whatever reason, the markets liked the Trump presidency and the Republicans controlling both houses. Well, that would have come to an end. If the Democrats take both houses, that would mean they would be able to resist, obstruct, and that would probably be good for gold, because it would also mean that there's a potential, if the Democrats manage to win both the House and the Senate, they may feel like they have a better shot now at winning in 2020, because their argument could be, look, we stopped this thing dead in its tracks in 2018, and now we're ready to go forward with a Democrat majority. All we need now is a new president. And I think if the conventional wisdom is that Trump is good and Republicans are good for the economy and bad for gold, well, then if the Democrats win both the House and the Senate, that would mean that's bad for the economy, bad for the stock market, and good for gold and silver. Now, if you think about it, the gold and silver prices did the best when the Democrats, in 2009, 10, 11, when Obama came into office. So if people saw that as a repeat, again, I don't know how the market's going to view it. Those are how I see things possibly breaking down. But again, that's just a preliminary observation. You would have to take into account what happens between now and then, and also start to look at how the market starts to view it. But what's interesting is we saw right up until a few hours after the election of Donald Trump that was supposed to be a disaster, and how quickly that changed. So even we might get into conventional wisdom a certain way, that if the Democrats win, the Republican wins, a certain thing will happen, and then it can happen, one of the results happens, and then we still see a complete 180. So let's take a look at what you guys think on this. I haven't been looking at the comments, just making sure that we're staying online here. All right, well, I've got no comments. No one has an opinion other than Not Me likes the snappy intro. He likes that intro that came from, that's from Mark Battaglia, and he creates all of the original music and intros for the Smaulgld site. He has Litecoin Charlie. I think that piece was called, I always call that one In the Style of Stevie Ray Vaughan, but that's not the name of it. Litecoin Charlie is the one that you hear all the time, or the most recently have been playing. And then there is Dow 20,000, I think, is one you might have heard, but I haven't played that one recently. And this one in particular is called, if I recall, let me just check it. He just redid them for me with this Smaulgld tagline at the end of the song to make it more signature sounding. The one you heard tonight is called Bitcoin Blues. Yes, Bitcoin Blues. So there's Bitcoin Blues, Dow 20,000, and Litecoin Charlie by Mark Battaglia. All right, well, let's see. We've got some comments here. Crypto Shrugged Author. Good evening, Crypto Shrugged Author. Roger Henley. But apparently it's different this time, Lewis. Just ask the pumpers. Well, I check in with the pumpers from time to time, but I don't ask them for their advice. Shark Air, sometimes you win when you lose. Yes, that's very insightful. That is true. So, for example, Trump might be better off if he loses the House. I don't think he'd be better off if he lost the House and the Senate. Losing the House would be very good because the Democrats would bring impeachment process, and they'd basically be wasting their time because it doesn't help anybody to bring impeachment proceedings and then not be able to pass them, which means you spent that time and effort and your political capital when you could have been doing something else. If you're going to do something and you know you're going to lose, I'm not sure you win points for doing that, and that could put Trump in a position just saying that they're obstructionists, they're mobs, they're resisting. So I think the Democrats would have to take the House and the Senate, and even then I think that it'd be foolish for them to try to impeach. I think they'd be better off trying to start to present whatever it is they think they want to present to the public, because I don't think just getting rid of Trump is a platform, because there's not a policy there. That's just being against whoever is there. You have to dismantle the whole apparatus, and by 2020 that's going to be hard to do. Bogus Fiat, regardless which party wins and holds power, I still expect smackdowns and paper shorting to continue. Well, that's true, but remember, even with the smackdowns, if you have prices rising, the smackdowns have less impact, obviously, than if the price is just heading down and they smack it down on the way down. So we did get decent pricing in 2016 when the Brexit went through. I mean, they did smack it down afterwards, but at least we got the benefit of the prices rising. Gold went up $100 some odd, silver went all the way up to $20. Yes, there was a smackdown, but imagine if Brexit had been the loser and Remain had won, then the silver and gold prices never would have been up to where they got to, and probably today we'd be at $11.40 gold and probably, $13, $12 in silver. Now, who knows? Matty D, most of the protesting is a huge turnoff to swing voters and energize the Democratic base but has minimal impact otherwise. I agree with that. I mean, I think when you see people pounding on walls and beating up people and yelling and screaming, and when you call them a mob, that is what it looks like to most people. Now, if you support that position that they're taking, you don't view it as a mob. You get energized by it. You're like, yeah, stick it to the man. I can't believe they deserve this. And you heard Hillary Clinton say, we can't be civil. Holder saying that we have to kick them when they're down. Yes, that energizes the base, but remember, neither Republicans nor the Democrats have a majority of voters. They rely on independents, and independents are not necessarily that riled up about things. And when they see people getting chased out of restaurants, I'm sure the first reaction they have is, that could be me. I'm not sure I really are in favor of that. You see someone say, yeah, let's have more of that. But I think even if you're an ardent supporter of that, I think it would change quick, fast, and in a hurry if it started happening to you. I don't understand why they think that it can happen to them. When you see them, like Cory Booker said, get in their faces, I wonder if there was a call to get in his face, how he would react to that, whether they would... I think the reason they continue to say it is because no one is doing it to them, and I don't think they expect it to be done to them, and they're probably right. I think that there is a different decorum on both sides. Both sides have a lack of civility and a lack of tone, but I think the Democrats one is more physical and the Republican one is more snarky and more... verbally abusive, less politically correct. I think that's where the Republicans are not civil, and I think the Democrats are not civil in their willingness to yell and scream and get in people's faces, so to speak. And again, it breaks down. Some people are more offended by the words, that the Republicans say, and other people are more offended by the creating of a crowd, as Maxine Warder calls it. But I don't think that it helps. Either party would win over more of the independents if they were more civil. I think that's what it's going to come down to. So if Republicans didn't use, or Trump especially, didn't use the name calling, then I think independents would warm to him more. And I think obviously if the Democrats weren't creating crowds and yelling and screaming, and the independents might warm to them if they had a message. But if the message is, hey, hey, ho, ho, someone's got to go, that's not really going to win over the middle. Matty D, Ivanka versus Chelsea 2024 showdown. I don't think Chelsea Clinton has a political future. She might, but there's too many other Democrats in front of her. And the thing is, it's not like her mother was... If her mother had won, then she clearly would be in the dynasty, because you would have Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, both presidents, and everybody would be looking to Chelsea. But I think now Hillary, to many Democrats, is persona non grata, and they would hope she would go away. And I'm sure those people that hope she goes away don't see anything in Chelsea Clinton that would make them want to jump on that train. Now, if she had won, clearly she would be next in line. All right, Drunkok. One question I've always wanted to ask is, how did gold and silver behave historically in recessions? Well, they behaved very well in the 70s recessions. Those were inflationary recessions. They were stagflationary, so they did very well. They did very poorly in the 1980s when you finally had the Reagan and Bush recoveries and very high GDP. Then through the 90s, when you had the big internet boom, they did not do very well in the 90s. Then in the 2000s, gold started to take off, all during the Bush years. And the economies were pretty good then. But I think the reason that gold and silver, especially gold, did well from 2000 to 2008, even before it got an overdrive after the financial crisis, was the growing unease over the size of the U.S. deficits. Remember, that's when you had Bush as president and Cheney saying deficits don't matter. I think there was an anti-dollar mentality. Even though you didn't really have a recession in 2004, 5, and 6, the price of gold was still rising. So gold does well generally in a recession. And as we've seen, Drunk Octopus, with that chart with the Dow versus the gold, we see that generally if the stock price is going higher, then it's what's called risk on. So people feel comfortable putting money in the stock market in a more risky thing than gold, and gold doesn't do as well. And like when you have these political upheavals or you have war, then it's risk off and people want to put money into more solid assets, hard assets like gold and silver. Nope, it's not off topic, because again, what would happen, this is why I raised the question, if you would think the conventional wisdom would be that if the Republicans kept the House and the Senate and Trump, that would just be a continuation of the same, and therefore that would be bad for gold and silver and great for the stock market. But it's possible people might go the next step further and say, well, wait a minute, this might create inflation, this might create a more aggressive Fed, and therefore would undo that. And so generally, I find that people like the Goldilocks situation. I don't think the markets would like to see Trump with a 55-45 House majority, Senate majority, and also a House majority, because I think then they would just see it as one-sided. Could be wrong, but I think that the Goldilocks is what they like. They like to see maybe the Democrats have the House, Republicans have the Senate, so they know not much is going to change, but they also know that there's not going to be a very aggressive... See, they also think if the Republicans hold both the House and the Senate, there'd be more tax cuts, which would mean more inflation, which would mean that the deficit probably initially for the next couple of years would also go higher. Now, you could argue that if you cut taxes, that it's possible that you can grow your way out, but it doesn't happen right away. At least there's an initial hit to the tax revenues because you don't have them. Yes, CNN does not like the M word. I heard that when one of the guys are trying to say that it's a mob, and like, no, don't say it's a mob. And you know, one person's protest is another person's mob. But objectively, if you look at people, it's a type of protest. You know, when you see, for example, if you go back and you look at some of the civil rights protests, you can see they're walking, they're singing, they're in a line, they're holding signs. That looks like a peaceful protest. Then there's others where you see it looks more like a mob because it turns into a riot. I mean, it's not really the intent or what you're protesting. It's how it manifests itself. Antifa looks more like a mob than a protest. And in fact, I would think they would say that they are not protesting when they counter-protest. They're looking to engage. So that's like street battle stuff. That's not the same thing as a protest. But it depends. Like, so for example, after President Trump won and they had the Million Woman March or whatever that was a protest. That didn't look like a mob. There were women with the hats on and everything, and that didn't look like a mob. What happened at the Supreme Court looked like a mob because they were banging on the doors and they were getting pulled away. It's a difference between, I guess, trespass and assaulting people. That looks like a mob, whereas people protesting with a permit, that's more viewed objectively as a protest. Now you can have the same views and you can have the same ambitions. It's really how it manifests itself. And I think, as Matty D says, that if it comes across not as a protest but as a mob, that's not a good thing. You don't win political points there. And the only way a mob wins is if it actually creates enough violence to scare off or to harm people and actually stops them from doing what you want to do for what they want to do. But if you act in that manner, it doesn't win over the middle. I think that's quite clear. Rosemary's Baby. All right, well, that's the preliminary view. We'll just have to follow it because I don't think there's a market view yet. And I just wanted to put down a marker as to what might happen. Not sure what's going to happen, but we'll revisit this probably in a couple of weeks and see where we think things are headed. And also, the elections, they may not even be a major mover of prices of gold and silver. We may see something from the Fed between now and then. We may see something in Germany. We may see something in Europe. We may see something coming out of North Korea. I mean, there's so many things that can impact the markets, but between now and the midterm elections. But I think the midterm elections will have, at some point, created a consensus as to what the market would like to see for a higher stock market. And I think by definition, a higher stock market would mean lower gold and silver prices. But you never know. It's possible they can both rise in tandem too. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow night.